In a quiet suburban neighborhood in the United States, a heartbreaking decision shattered the life of a newborn. Born with severe facial deformities, little Noah was left behind by the very people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. His own parents. They saw only imperfection, something they could not accept. But where they saw tragedy, one compassionate doctor saw something else. A child deserving of love. What happened next would not only change Noah's fate, but touch the hearts of everyone who heard his story. On a chilly autumn night in a small American town, the maternity ward of St. Mary's Hospital was filled with the usual hum of newborn cries and hushed conversations of nurses moving from room to room. But in one dimly lit corner of the ward, a different kind of silence lingered. A silence heavy with unspoken words, with hesitation, with heartbreak. Mr. and Mrs. Carter sat stiffly in their hospital room, their hands clenched together, their eyes fixed on the tiny bundle lying in the bassinet before them. Their son, just hours old, should have been a source of joy. Instead, they looked at him with a mixture of shock and disbelief. His features were not what they had expected, not what they had hoped for. His face, marked by severe deformities, made them recoil, their love overshadowed by fear and shame. The doctors had assured them that he was healthy, that he would grow like any other child. But for the Carters, that wasn't enough. They had dreamed of a perfect baby, a child they could proudly show to the world. And now, as they sat in that sterile hospital room, the weight of their disappointment crushed any maternal and paternal instincts they might have had. A nurse entered the room, smiling gently as she reached for the baby, expecting the usual delight in the parents' eyes. Instead, she was met with an empty gaze. Mrs. Carter finally spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "We can't take him," she whispered. "We just can't." The nurse froze. "I'm sorry." Mr. Carter cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. "We're leaving him here." For a moment, the room felt colder than the autumn wind howling outside. The nurse, trained to handle difficult situations, struggled to find words. How could they turn away from their own child? How could they see him as anything less than a miracle? Word of the abandonment spread quickly among the hospital staff, and soon, Dr. James Bennett, the senior pediatrician, was called in. A man known for his kindness and unwavering dedication to his patients, Dr. Bennett had seen many heartbreaking cases throughout his career. But as he looked down at the tiny boy, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the rejection he had just faced, something inside him stirred. This child had been left behind because he was imperfect in the eyes of the world. But to Dr. Bennett, he was perfect in the way that truly mattered. And so, with a quiet but resolute decision, the doctor chose to do something extraordinary. Something that would change not only the child's future, but also redefine the meaning of love and compassion. Dr. Bennett stood in the hospital room, his heart heavy with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He had seen abandoned babies before, but this time it felt different. Perhaps it was the way the infant's tiny fingers curled unconsciously, searching for warmth, for comfort, searching for a love that had just been denied. The nurse, still shaken, turned to him. "Doctor, what should we do?" Dr. Bennett let out a slow breath. "We do what we always do. We care for him." He gently lifted the baby from the bassinet, cradling the fragile body in his arms. The child stirred slightly, his face scrunching up before settling back into sleep. Dr. Bennett studied his features. Yes, they were different, but there was nothing in them that made this child any less worthy of love. That night, as the hospital worked through the legal procedures of placing the baby into the system, Dr. Bennett sat by his office window, staring out into the cold night. The thought of this child growing up without love, shuffled from one foster home to another, weighed on his mind. He had spent decades healing bodies, but what about healing wounds that couldn't be seen? The wounds of rejection, of loneliness? And then, as if an unseen force had placed the thought in his heart, he knew what he had to do. The next morning, he made his decision official. He would take the baby home. He would be his father. Years later, Noah Bennett grew up in a house filled with books, laughter, and unconditional love. Though he faced challenges, whispers at school, the stares of strangers, he never once doubted his worth. Because every night, as his father tucked him into bed, he would say the same words, "You are loved, you are wanted, and you are perfect just the way you are." Noah held on to those words, and as he grew older, he discovered something remarkable. The very features that had once made people turn away became a symbol of resilience. He became an advocate, speaking to children who felt different, reminding them that beauty was not in symmetry but in kindness, in courage, in the way a heart chooses to love despite everything. One day, after giving a speech at a children's hospital, a woman approached him. She was older now, but there was something familiar in her eyes filled with regret. "Noah," she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm your mother." Silence stretched between them, thick with years of absence, of pain. She searched his face, perhaps looking for anger, for resentment. But Noah only smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "I know," he said softly. Tears slipped down her face. "Can you ever forgive me?" Noah thought of his father, of the love that had shaped him, of the lessons he had learned about compassion. And then, with a heart full of grace, he reached out and took her hands in his own. "I already have." Noah gently squeezed the trembling hands of the woman standing before him. He could feel the weight of her regret, a burden she had likely carried for years. His birth mother, the one who had turned away from him the moment he entered the world, was now standing before him, seeking a chance to right her wrongs. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke. "Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you. I was wrong. I let fear and selfishness cloud my judgment. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I just need you to know how much I regret what I did." Noah studied her face, not with anger, not with resentment, but with quiet understanding. He had learned from his father, Dr. Bennett, that love was not about perfection. It was about choosing to love despite the imperfections, despite the wounds. He asked softly, "Why did you come today?" She wiped her tears, trying to steady her voice. "I've followed your journey from afar. I've read your articles, watched your speeches. I've seen the incredible person you've become. Strong, kind, and full of grace. And that made me realize just how deeply I failed you." Noah smiled, his expression filled with warmth. "If you truly believe I am a good person, then there's no reason I wouldn't be able to forgive you." His mother let out a quiet sob. She had never imagined that the son she had abandoned would be the very one to show her the compassion she had once failed to give. After that day, Noah didn't rush to welcome her back into his life. But he didn't shut the door either. He understood that healing took time, and that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant moving forward without the weight of resentment. 1 year later, Noah returned to visit the house he had grown up in, the modest but warm home of Dr. Bennett. His adoptive father was older now, his hair completely white, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had saved Noah all those years ago. Sitting together on the wooden porch, Dr. Bennett gave him a knowing smile. "Son, I am proud of you." Noah smiled back. "I'm just trying to live by the lessons you taught me, to face the world with love, not fear." Dr. Bennett nodded, his gaze full of quiet pride. "Do you have any regrets?" Noah looked out at the horizon, where the golden hues of the setting sun painted the sky. He thought about his journey, from an abandoned child to a man who had learned to love himself, and finally, a man who had found the strength to forgive. "No," he said firmly, "not at all." Noah's story wasn't just one of loss or pain. It was a story of hope, a story of a doctor who saw the worth of a child when the world had turned its back, a story of a boy who turned his suffering into strength, and, above all, a story of love, one that transcended blood, appearances, and even past mistakes. And that was what truly made the world a beautiful place.